For the many incredible highs the Resident Evil franchise has, it also has a great deal of lows that rival the Mariana Trench. Many of these lows came from a specific period in history. Roughly from around 2012 to 2016 was a very murky time for the series, as the Resident Evil games that came out during this time would be shrouded in controversy for years to come, due to their lack of clear vision, terrible mechanics, and scummy monetization practices. One of those games specifically has been festering in the back of my mind for the past few months, due to a mix of morbid curiosity and having repressed memories of the game when I played it years ago. The game I'm talking about is Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, a title that gives me very mixed emotions, considering it was a game I initially enjoyed when I was a kid, but that memory is slightly soiled by the fact that another kid from my school nicked my copy of it. Over the years I realised that maybe he was doing me a favour, considering a lot of the hate the game gets, and because I'm an incredibly toxic individual, all that hate made me want to play the game even more. But much like Survival Instinct, the game is no longer available to play on Steam. Luckily the game is still available to buy on Xbox, and for £15 no less. With all of the negative reviews I saw online, I braced myself for a complete shit show of a game, and yet I wasn't met with a complete shit show. It does have its flaws, like a lot of them, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't find some enjoyment with Operation Raccoon City. I can see why the game got the backlash it did, from clunky and outright useless mechanics to scummy business practices. Operation Raccoon City ticks many of the boxes for a shite Resident Evil game, and yet there is something about it that makes it somewhat enjoyable at times. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City was developed by Capcom and Slant 6 Games. Who are they, you might be asking?
Don't know.
I tried to find out more about them, and all I found is that they worked on the SOCOM franchise, and mostly worked with handheld consoles and phones. Ah yes, the perfect candidates to work on a third-person shooter that was only released for consoles. Absolute genius 4D chess move from Capcom. Operation Raccoon City shockingly revolves around the events of Raccoon City.
Dear God.
And unlike past games where you play as the heroes that try to prevent the outbreak from ravaging the city, in a unique turn of events you play as the faceless Umbrella henchmen who are sent into the city to destroy any evidence of Umbrella's involvement in the outbreak, as well as kill any survivors who might squeal. The initial trailer for the game painted things very differently, as along with the USS, Umbrella Security Service, there was to be another playable faction, which were the Spec Ops. Though you can actually play as the Spec Ops, they didn't launch with the game, which I'll talk more about later, because it's a bit of a shitty thing Capcom did. The game is essentially a squad shooter mixed in with elements of typical Resident Evil gameplay, along with a bunch of cameos from Resident Evil 2 and 3. They really wanted you to know this game takes place in Raccoon City. You take control of one of 6 Delta Team members, and you play through every mission in a squad of 4. The team consists of Lupo, the squad leader, Bertha, the medic, Beltway, the demo man, Vector, the recon, Spectre, surveillance, and Four Eyes, the field scientist. These guys may look cool, but don't let that fool you, because they're all very generic. I mean, I love their designs, but that's about it. We kick off the story inside the Umbrella research facility, where we see Hunk go to town on some generic soldiers. Delta Team then follows Hunk throughout the facility, killing off any US soldiers who have breached the base. Oh no, sorry, they're actually UBCS operatives who have decided to protect Birkin, so instead of helping out their employers, they're protecting a traitor. Seems reasonable. After fighting your way through UBCS scum, Hunk takes you to Birkin's office where he executes the scientist. Hey, I know that pained groan. Of course, Birkin doesn't stay down for good and pursues Delta Team, and Hunk decides to hold the line while you retreat. He truly is the hero of Umbrella. A couple of days go by and Raccoon City falls to the spread of the T and G viruses, and to prevent any evidence from leaking out to the rest of the world, an evil British man sends Delta Team into the city to tie up any loose ends. Here you encounter all manner of BOWs like zombies, hunters, and a shit ton of Crimson Heads. No wonder the entire city fell in a few days if these guys are running around everywhere. The law enforcement in the city were pretty incompetent, but the zombies are no match for Delta Team, who power through the streets of Raccoon City, even coming across Nikolai. Why aren't you shooting him? He's UBCS. Nikolai becomes sort of a reoccurring antagonist for a couple of missions, after you see him take out his entire squad on some security footage.
Nikolai, what the hell are you doing? Why did you sacrifice your team?
They served their purpose most excellently.
Honestly, why do any of you care? Just a day prior you were shooting the piss out of any UBCS guys you came across. After reaching City Hall you burn some evidence, and are instructed to knock out a power grid that should hopefully prevent survivors from escaping the city. Yeah, you do a lot of scummy shit in this game, which I must say was a nice change from just being a goody two-shoes superhero. Since you and your squad are so good at your jobs, and probably because you're the only henchmen who aren't dead yet, you get sent on a special mission to bring Nemesis back under the control of Umbrella, which leads you to a facility full of some of the creepiest little parasites parasites I've ever seen, and a tyrant who gets really pissed off when you give him a migraine. After singing a sweet lullaby to Nemesis, Delta Team has to destroy evidence left behind by Irons, as Command believes he might use it to extort the company. Nah, I'm sure he's busy doing other stuff. After doing this, Vector and the boys run into Leon, who they are ordered to kill. The jammy bastard makes his escape before Delta Team can riddle him with bullet holes, even though I quite clearly shot him there, and being the understanding bosses they are, Command decides to abandon you.
Delta Team, you're on your own.
Command, we shot the guy in the head and he's still breathing. How's that fair? Every monster in the city decides to come after you at this point, so the team decides to hunker down at the nearest safe house, which turns out to be this crappy old shop. Yep, nothing's getting through those blanks. Delta Team barely makes it through the night before Command replies to their distress calls, asking them to pull off one more job for them to earn their freedom out of the city. Kill Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield. Once you beat arguably the worst level in any Resident Evil game ever to date, you are met with two options: defend Leon or execute him. And to prove my loyalty to the actual best Resident Evil protagonist, I gunned down Leon and my two squad mates who chickened out of finishing the mission. The story was okay. It's not a narrative carried by interesting playable characters. The main interest comes from seeing old locations and faces from Resident Evil 2 and 3. Whoa, there's the clock tower, that's so cool. Oh look, it's Leon and Claire, I remember them. Whoa, we get to fight Nemesis, that's sweet. This is one of the main crutches the game leans on to give it some life, which it desperately needs considering the campaign is no longer than 4 hours. Even when ignoring the length of the game, most people's biggest gripe with Operation Raccoon City is its gameplay. The boys at Six Slant Games had previous experience working with shooters, and I've never played any of those games, but if those games are anything like this one, I'm surprised that franchise lasted as long as it did, because this game has some serious issues. I'll start with the positives, as it's only fair. I will say that despite the characters in the game not being very interesting, besides looking cool, the game offers quite a surprising range of variety, which stems from the XP system. The XP system is the backbone for a lot of Operation Raccoon City's mechanics, as you need XP to buy new weapons, and even buy abilities for each character. XP's earned through killing zombies, finding collectibles, and completing levels. The less times you die, the faster you finish the level, the more data you find, and the more zombies you kill accumulate to a rating at the end of each level, much like in other Resident Evil titles when you beat the game. So the higher your rating, the more XP you earn. There is also a massive variety when it comes to weapons you can buy in the game, although disappointingly a lot of them do feel the same, and useless in some cases. The mob special is daylight robbery. An aspect of Operation Raccoon City I completely forgot about was that characters in the game have their own unique abilities. It's not the most refined version of specialists with abilities, but it adds a little bit of incentive to try out different characters. Some of the abilities add unique dynamics to the gameplay, like Vector's invisibility cloak, Four Eyes' freaky gun that can create friendly crimson heads, Spectre's sonar that can help you spot enemies and loot, and Lupo's infinite ammo glitch. The addition of abilities prevents the game from feeling generic, at least for a while. Fighting zombies and other BOWs is actually really fun for the most part. Big emphasis on for the most part. I've always loved the idea and story of Raccoon City falling apart and being amongst the chaos in the streets and sewers. At times, Operation Raccoon City really captures the essence of chaos and horror of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis teased with its cutscenes. Getting completely overrun in close spaces by zombies and having BOWs fall in front of you was actually distressing. This game also acknowledges that getting attacked so many times by zombies would probably get you infected. When you take enough damage from zombies and crimson heads, you run the risk of becoming infected, and you need antiviral spray to counteract it. It adds a pretty cool dynamic, as if you don't get rid of it fast enough, you become a zombie, and it can happen to your squad mates too. And if you don't have any antiviral spray to give to an infected teammate, you can just put them down like a dog.
Sorry, brother.
That's pretty much all of the positives I can give the gameplay, because the rest of it is really bad. Not bad as in Lupo bad, I mean like terrible. Operation Raccoon City has one of the worst control schemes I've ever seen. The worst offenders hands down have to be the aiming and movement systems. The game feels like it has tank controls but for your aiming. When you aim in any direction you gain momentum, making it really unpleasant when aiming at something, especially when it's fast. It makes combat so unpredictable, and not in a good way. It seems like Six Slant Games knew how bad the aiming was, because they added heavy aim assist, as well as this sick mechanic where you lock onto enemies that does more harm than good, and is the same button you need to use when swapping weapons. So be sure not to press the button too quickly, or you'll be pulling off this dogshit move, probably end up getting yourself killed. Now when you were booting up Raccoon City for the very first time, whenever that may have been, I'm sure the first thing that came into your mind was, I really love the creatures of Resident Evil. I sure hope I get to fight a lot of generic army dudes over and over again. If that was the case, then you got your wish, because that's what you'll be fighting for what feels like 70% of the game. This is when you realise that the mechanics of the game are made specifically for a shooter, as in human versus human. Nothing interests me less in a world full of messed up monsters than fighting anything other than monsters. I get that the whole purpose of Delta Team is to silence any survivors and destroy evidence, which means you probably are going to run into soldiers sent into evac survivors and retrieve evidence, but I don't want to fight them all the time. I want to fight hordes of zombies, creepy crawlies, and messed up bosses, and yeah, you do that, but not nearly enough. There's no game in the franchise that can be improved with generic army dudes. My disdain for this aspect of Operation Raccoon City stems from how bad the third-person shooter combat is. Along with the janky aiming and controls, the cover system is unusable and borderline pointless in most cases. Games that rely on cover-based gameplay have to nail the art of getting the player in and out of cover as quickly and smoothly as possible. The Gears of War series is a perfect example of this mechanic, as it shows the symbiotic relationship between man and wall. Operation Raccoon City's cover system just doesn't suit the game at all. The player can either get into cover by pressing the A button or by brushing up against a piece of cover. The problem is that this rarely ever works. Sometimes you get into cover no problem, other times you're left stood in the middle of a firefight angrily thrusting against a wall trying to get behind it. It's impressive actually, because once you get into cover you feel just as unsafe as you did out of cover. Even aiming over cover to shoot is really buggy, as you just get locked onto the bit of cover you're behind, meaning most of the time you have to exit the cover to shoot and re-enter to prevent taking damage. But NPCs in this game never miss. The AI seems to have been put through a Rainbow Six Siege simulator, as they pull off some of the dirtiest angles I've ever seen. They immediately lock onto the player without fail, every single time, and this combined with the shitty cover system means you'll be seeing this death screen every 5 minutes or so. If these guys were protecting Raccoon City, the zombies wouldn't have stood a chance. It's incredibly obnoxious. In fact, a lot of this game is obnoxious. Trying to pick up loot in Operation Raccoon City is a complete struggle. Shooters usually make picking up ammo and health as easy as possible. That way you can stay in the action without your full attention getting dragged away from the fight you're in. Operation Raccoon City's buggy controls make it so you have to look at something directly, no matter how close you are to it. This leads to you getting shot in the back of the head, the back, the arse, at least 20 times per mission. I don't really care if you like the game. I mean, I even enjoyed moments of it, but there's no denying that this is a poorly made game. And yet there's elements where you can see that the developers thought, oh yeah, we did something there. The lickers in Operation Raccoon City are some of the most broken, unfun enemies to fight in any of the Resident Evil games. Yes, even compared to these knobheads. There's never one or two, there's usually about 20 in a room, and they're all sat there tonguing you like you're the middle part of an Oreo. Zombies can grab you, which makes this really stupid high-pitched noise that's supposed to make you jump. The most obnoxious thing in the whole game though has to be the final level on the USS campaign. This without a doubt is the worst level of any Resident Evil game. Everything I've cried about throughout this video culminates in this one single level. The final fight prior to getting to Leon has you face off against an infinite amount of Crimson Heads and a squad of highly trained soldiers who never miss a bullet. Surely any one of you who played this game can agree, even if you like the game, that this level was pure shite. Operation Raccoon City's initial trailer revealed to fans that two factions would be playable when the game launched. The USS and the Spec Ops, and yet I've only really made mention to the bad guys. Well, that's because the Spec Ops, although in the game, were locked behind DLC. Pretty insulting when you consider how short the main campaign is, and the audacity for Capcom to make you pay for what should have been content in the base game is really quite impressive. It's even worse when you realise that the Spec Ops campaign reuses so much from the first campaign, and the characters are even less interesting than a bunch of faceless nobodies, except for Tweed and Party Girl.
Party Girl, surveillance. Reporting.
How are there so many good voice actors in this game? You've got Nika Futterman voicing Lupo, Catherine Tabor voicing Party Girl, and they even convinced the medic to play a generic army dude. Instead of giving us a completely different experience, both campaigns use similar or the exact same locations, aside from a couple of instances. The gameplay and mechanics, as expected, are the exact same, however there are a few changes to accommodate the change in perspective. Instead of a generic evil supervillain telling you what to do, you have a generic army general telling you what to do. The characters of the Spec Ops team once again have a specific class attached to them and share abilities with their USS counterparts. All of my complaints with the first campaign line up with this one too, except in this one there's turrets and you fight generic USS soldiers. The trailer had you believe that these two squads would be in conflict with each other, but they never interact, bar one time where Four Eyes talks to your squad when you're heading into the dead factory. Yep, that's the only time. Like the first campaign, the Spec Ops campaign relies heavily on callbacks to Resident Evil 2 and 3. We get to meet Jill Valentine and Carlos, and we get to fight Nemesis and working? That's so cool. Downloadable content seems to be a pretty big low point for Operation Raccoon City. The Spec Ops expansion was bad enough, but there's also DLC for character skins, guns, and you even have to pay for the Nemesis multiplayer game mode. To be fair, it's a practice that's become commonplace in the gaming industry these days, but it was a new low for Resident Evil. Games that strived on delivering good stories and weird horrifying monsters, and this game stooped to making you pay extra for such a pivotal part of the game that was just a bunch of reused content. Though I have to say I did like the design of the mutated tyrant. Shame his boss fight was a bag of arse. Initially the areas you visit have some variety, but the more you play the game, the more you realise how samey Raccoon City feels. This makes the Spec Ops campaign feel even more disappointing, as most of the levels are very similar to the USS campaign. Even the ones that are unique to each campaign aren't that memorable. It feels like they were more concerned about trying to recapture how Raccoon City felt in Resident Evil 2 and 3 without adding anything new. This makes me appreciate games like Resident Evil Outbreak 1 and 2 a lot more, as they had genuinely interesting and creative areas for you to explore that made Raccoon City feel varied, like an actual city. Each level also had its own unique quirks and enemies that made them feel different, but it's like Six Slant Games was too scared to stray away from the mainline Resident Evil games, despite Operation Raccoon City not being canon anyway. While Operation Raccoon City isn't terrible, it feels like a whole lot of wasted potential. Its disastrous mechanics make it unbearable to play at times, and Six Slate Games' hesitation to make anything other than one giant callback is really disappointing. However, if you are able to switch your brain off, then it can be a fun romp. Mindlessly shooting Resident Evil baddies is enjoyable for a time, but the possibilities for this game could have been endless. It sucks because Capcom proved that they can make fun and fully functioning third-person shooters, with the likes of Lost Planet 2. Both games are similar in concept, but one is a chaotic shooter full of character and creepy monsters, and the other is Operation Raccoon City. Nah, you know what, forget this game. I'm just gonna go play Lost Planet 2 some more. I'll see you guys later.